I want you to listen carefully, because this story is about a boy whose life teaches us something powerful, something that can change the way you look at your own life. This boy wasn't born special, at least not in the way people usually think. He wasn't born into riches. He wasn't blessed with extraordinary talents, and he didn't have the kind of family that could open doors for him. In fact, he came from a small place where people didn't dream very big, because dreaming big often felt like wasting time. And yet, this boy, through all the hardships and all the failures, showed the world what happens when you never, ever give up. The boy's name was Daniel. He lived in a small town surrounded by dusty roads, quiet fields, and houses made of bricks that had seen better days. His father worked long hours in a workshop, fixing broken tools and machines for neighbors, while his mother stayed at home, trying to keep everything together for Daniel and his younger sister. Life was simple, but also heavy. There was never quite enough money, and Daniel often noticed how his parents whispered late at night about bills they couldn't pay. He pretended not to hear, but those whispers stayed with him. From a young age, Daniel was curious. He loved asking questions, and he loved stories. He would sit by his grandfather, who used to tell him tales about heroes who had nothing but courage, about explorers who traveled across oceans with nothing but faith. His grandfather would always say, "Daniel, the world will try to stop you. But if you keep moving, if you keep fighting, the world will have no choice but to make room for you." Daniel carried those words deep in his heart, but the world wasn't easy on him. In school, Daniel was not the smartest kid. He tried hard, but his grades were always average. Teachers didn't expect much from him, and some even said out loud, "Daniel is a nice boy, but he won't go very far." Imagine being a child and hearing the people you're supposed to trust say you don't have much of a future. That could crush anyone. But Daniel, though it hurt him, didn't let those words define him. He would go home, look in the mirror, and whisper to himself, "I will show them. I will not give up." He wasn't sure how, but he knew one thing. Giving up was not an option. One of the first tests of his determination came when he was around 12. His school announced a local race, a running competition. Daniel wasn't an athlete. He was smaller than most of the boys in his class, and no one expected him to even join. But when the teacher asked for names, Daniel's hand shot up. His classmates laughed. You can't even run fast. You'll be last," someone shouted. Daniel just smiled and said, "We'll see." The day of the race came, and all the boys lined up. Could hear whispers from the crowd. People betting who would win. No one even mentioning his name. The whistle blew, and everyone took off. For the first few seconds, Daniel was behind, his legs burning, his chest tight. Part of him wanted to stop, to accept what everyone said about him. But then he remembered his grandfather's words. He pushed harder, his arms pumping, his breath ragged. He didn't come first that day. He didn't even come second. But he didn't come last either. He finished the race stronger than anyone expected, and though he collapsed on the ground afterward, a fire lit inside him. He realized something. It wasn't about winning, it was about refusing to stop. That moment became the seed of his mindset. Every time he faced something difficult, he would remember the feeling of crossing that finish line, exhausted but proud. Because he didn't quit, years passed and Daniel grew older. His family's struggles grew heavier too. His father's health started to weaken from years of hard labor. And Daniel, though still young, felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Many of his friends started dreaming of leaving the town, going to the city, finding easier lives. But Daniel stayed, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. His family needed him, and he refused to abandon them. At the same time, Daniel still had dreams of his own. He wanted to learn, to grow, to achieve something that would make his parents proud. Something that would prove all those teachers wrong. But how? With no money for university, with no connections, with no clear path. It seemed impossible. And yet, every night before he slept, he reminded himself, never give up. One day, when Daniel was 16, something happened that changed the course of his life. He was walking back from the market when he saw an old poster on a wall. It was faded and torn, but he could still read the words, "Local talent competition. Share your skill, share your story." The winner would receive a small scholarship to attend workshops in the city. For most people, it was just a fun event. For Daniel, it was a chance. The problem was, he had no obvious talent. He wasn't the best at sports, he wasn't great at singing, and he didn't play any instruments. But then he thought about what he loved most: stories. He remembered all the nights with his grandfather, listening to tales of courage and adventure. He thought, maybe my talent is telling stories. Maybe my words can matter. So he signed up. When his classmates heard, they mocked him again. A storyteller, that's not even a real talent. But Daniel didn't let their voices shake him. He spent nights preparing, writing down a story of a boy who never gave up. A boy who kept walking even when the road was full of stones. The day of the competition, Daniel stood on stage, his hands shaking, his voice trembling. The lights were bright, the crowd silent. For a moment, fear almost won. But then he remembered that first race, how he felt crossing the line. He took a deep breath and began. His words flowed, his eyes lit up, his voice grew stronger with each sentence. By the time he finished, the room was silent not with boredom, but with awe, and then applause. Loud, long, real applause. Daniel didn't win first place that day. He won second. But more importantly, he discovered something. His voice had power. His story touched people. That night, walking home with the small certificate in his hand, Daniel realized he had found his path. But the journey was only beginning. He faced rejection after rejection when he tried to share his stories beyond his town. Publishers said, "No one will read this." Competitions turned him down. People laughed at his dream. Each no felt like a stone thrown at him. But Daniel didn't stop. He kept writing. He kept speaking. He kept showing up. Because deep down, he believed that every no was just one step closer to a yes. And so, slowly, piece by piece, Daniel began building his future. Daniel stood in his small room that night, holding the certificate from the competition. It wasn't much, just a piece of paper with his name written on it, but to him, it was proof. Proof that he had something inside him, proof that his voice could be heard. But he also knew the road ahead was going to be long and difficult. A single certificate wouldn't change his family's life. It wouldn't pay the bills, and it wouldn't silence the voices of doubt around him. Yet for Daniel, it was enough to spark a fire that he refused to let die. The following months were hard. His father's health continued to decline, and Daniel had to work part-time jobs after school. He carried sacks of grain at the market, fixed broken chairs for neighbors, and sometimes stayed up late repairing shoes just to earn a few coins. It was exhausting, and there were nights when he collapsed on his bed, too tired to even dream. But no matter how tired he was, he always wrote. By the light of a flickering lamp, he filled page after page with stories of heroes who fell but stood again. Stories of dreamers who faced storms but kept walking. He was writing his own life between those lines, even if he didn't realize it. His friends started drifting away. Many of them left for the city to look for jobs, chasing faster money, chasing easier paths. They told him he was wasting his time. Daniel, no one cares about your stories. You'll end up with nothing. Come with us. Find real work. Words hurt, but Daniel stayed. Something deep inside whispered to him, "Your time will come. Just don't give up." Came another opportunity. A traveling teacher visited Daniel's school one afternoon. She was from the city, educated and full of energy, and she held a workshop about the power of words. She asked students to volunteer to share something they had written. Most were shy, but Daniel felt his heart pounding. He raised his hand. Standing in front of the class, he read one of his short stories. His voice trembled at first, but then grew stronger, more confident, as he poured his heart into the words. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment before the teacher spoke. She smiled and said, "You have something rare, Daniel. You have passion. Don't let it go." I think that single sentence stayed with him for years. It was like a seed planted in his heart, a reminder that even strangers could see what he was trying to become. For the first time, he felt that maybe just maybe he wasn't crazy to believe in himself, but belief alone wasn't enough. He wanted to share his stories with the world, and to do that, he needed resources he didn't have. Publishing required money. Traveling required money. Even attending events where he could meet others required money. Daniel had none. His family could barely afford food, let alone dreams. He would work harder than ever, and every coin he earned, he would save. For 2 years, Daniel lived like this, working by day, writing by night. His clothes grew old, his shoes wore thin, but his determination never wavered. Many times he wanted to give up, especially when rejections piled up. Letters came back with phrases like "not good enough," "lacks potential," "doesn't fit our needs." Each one stung like a knife. But each time, Daniel remembered the boy who finished the race, the boy who stood on stage trembling but spoke anyway. He told himself, "I will not stop. One day, someone will say yes." And then it happened. One small publisher in the city sent him a letter. They had read his story and wanted to include it in a collection of young writers. It wasn't a big deal. It wouldn't make him rich or famous, but it was a beginning. The first yes after countless no's. Daniel held that letter in his hands for hours, tears filling his eyes. He had proven to himself that persistence could break walls. Traveling to the city for the first time was like stepping into another world. Not the tall buildings, the noise, the endless crowds. It was overwhelming. Daniel felt small, almost invisible. But he reminded himself why he was there. He walked into the publisher's office, nervous but proud. Meeting other writers, hearing their journeys, he realized something important. Everyone struggled. Everyone faced rejection, but the ones who succeeded were the ones who didn't stop trying. That realization became his fuel. But life didn't suddenly become easy. In fact, new challenges appeared. His father's condition worsened, and medical bills drained whatever little money Daniel managed to save. He worked longer hours, sometimes going without sleep, juggling jobs and his passion. He was constantly tired, constantly on the edge of giving up. There were nights when he sat by his desk, staring at blank pages, his mind screaming, "Why are you doing this? It's hopeless." But then he would remember his mother's tired smile when she read one of his stories. He would remember the teacher who told him he had passion. He would remember the applause the first time he spoke on stage. And slowly, the strength to continue would return. One winter evening, while walking home through the cold, Daniel saw a group of children huddled around a small fire. They were poor, their clothes torn, their faces pale from hunger. Something about that scene broke him inside. He went home, wrote down their story in his notebook, and promised himself, "One day, I'll use my words to help children like them. One day, my stories will do more than just fill pages. They will change lives." That promise became his mission. He no longer wrote just for himself. He wrote for every child who felt invisible, for every person told they weren't good enough, for every dreamer who wanted to give up. His words became his way of fighting back against the world's cruelty. Over the next few years, Daniel faced setbacks that would have crushed most people. His first book idea was rejected by more than 20 publishers. His family nearly lost their home. He even thought about giving up once, packing his things, and working full-time at the market. But each time he stood on the edge of surrender. Something pulled him back. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. The world will try to stop you, but if you keep moving, the world will have no choice but to make room for you. Slowly, opportunities started opening. His short stories gained attention in small magazines. He was invited to speak at a community event where he told the story of his journey. People listened. People connected. Some even cried. For the first time, Daniel realized his words were not just his own. They belonged to everyone who needed hope. And just when he thought things were finally moving forward, life threw him another storm. His father passed away. The loss shook Daniel to his core. The man who had sacrificed everything for his family, who had worked until his body broke, was gone. For weeks, Daniel couldn't write a single word. His grief was heavy, and for the first time, he wondered if maybe the world had won. If maybe his fight was over. But one night, as he sat alone with his notebook, he felt something. It was as if his father's spirit was there, whispering, "Keep going, son. Don't stop now." With tears streaming down his face, Daniel picked up his pen and wrote again. And this time, his words carried more power than ever before. Daniel wiped his tears that night as he closed the notebook, his father's memory still fresh in his heart. The grief was heavy, but something had shifted inside him. He realized his father's life had been one of sacrifice, of working silently, so his children could have a chance at something better. If Daniel gave up now, all those sacrifices would mean nothing. He made a promise to himself, whispering into the night, "I will not stop. I will make him proud. I will carry his spirit forward." From that moment, Daniel's writing changed. It wasn't just about telling stories anymore. It was about pouring out every piece of his soul. Every lesson he had learned from pain. Every spark of hope he had found in the darkest nights. His words grew deeper, stronger, and more real. People who read his stories began to say, "This boy doesn't just write. He speaks to your heart." But life didn't suddenly turn into a fairy tale. He still struggled with money. He still faced rejection. His family still leaned on him heavily, especially his younger sister, who now looked up to him as her guide. The world didn't hand him success. Instead, it kept testing him over and over again. And each time, Daniel chose to keep going. One day, years later, something unexpected happened. A well-known speaker from the city came across one of Daniel's stories in a small magazine. The words moved him so deeply that he invited Daniel to speak at a conference in front of hundreds of people. Daniel had never spoken to such a large crowd before. The thought terrified him. He remembered how his voice shook the first time he stood on a stage as a boy. But he also remembered what happened after, how the crowd applauded, how they believed in him. So he said yes. The day of the conference, Daniel stood backstage, his palms sweating, his heart racing. He could hear the murmur of the crowd, the sound of hundreds of voices blending together. For a moment, fear almost paralyzed him. He thought, "What if I fail? What if I stumble? What if they laugh at me?" But then he took a deep breath and remembered the promise he had made to his father, to himself, to all the children he wanted to help. He whispered inside, "Don't give up. Not now, not ever." When he stepped onto the stage, the lights nearly blinded him. But as he began to speak, something powerful happened. His fear melted away, replaced by a quiet strength. He told them about his journey, the dusty roads of his hometown, the whispers of doubt from his teachers, the first race he ran, the rejections, the certificate, the letter from the publisher, his father's passing, and the countless nights he almost quit. He told them about the children by the fire and how he wanted his words to be light for people living in darkness. By the time he finished, the entire hall was silent. And then applause erupted loud, thunderous applause that shook him to his core. People stood on their feet, some with tears in their eyes. Daniel realized at that very moment that his dream was no longer just his own. His story belonged to everyone who had ever struggled, everyone who had ever been told they weren't enough, everyone who needed a reason to keep going. That speech became the turning point of his life. Invitations began to pour in. Schools wanted him to speak to students. Communities wanted him to inspire their children. Even organizations from the city reached out, asking him to share his message of perseverance. Slowly but surely, Daniel's name began to spread. He was no longer just a boy from a forgotten town. He was the boy who never gave up. With every stage he stood on, with every story he shared, Daniel remembered his father's whisper and his grandfather's wisdom. He carried his town in his heart, never forgetting where he came from. And with the little money he began to earn, he did something beautiful. He started helping children like the ones he had once seen around that fire. He bought them books, he gave them food, and most importantly, he gave them hope. He told them, "Your life may be hard now, but never give up. One day, your story will inspire others." Years passed, and Daniel's journey only grew. He published books that reached thousands. He traveled to places he had once only dreamed of. But no matter how far he went, he never stopped being humble. He never stopped working. He never forgot the pain of rejection, the weight of loss, the sting of doubt. And perhaps that was his greatest strength. He carried his scars proudly. And he showed the world that scars were not signs of weakness, but proof of survival. And so Daniel's life became a living example of his message. The boy who once finished a race in the middle, the boy who once stood trembling on a stage, the boy who once sat hungry and tired with nothing but a penhay, became a man whose words healed hearts, lifted spirits, and reminded people everywhere that giving up was never the answer. In the end, Daniel understood something deeply. Success wasn't about fame or money or recognition. Success was about refusing to quit, no matter how many times you fell. It was about standing up again and again, even when the world told you to stay down. And that is exactly what he had done. One evening, as he stood in front of a crowd of young students, Daniel looked into their eyes and said, "I was once just like you. I was told I wasn't good enough. I was laughed at, rejected, and pushed down. But I decided one thing I would never give up. And that decision changed my life. If you remember nothing else from my story, remember this. Your dream may take time, it may hurt, and it may seem impossible. But if you never give up, the world will have no choice but to make room for you. The hall filled with applause, but, more importantly, with hope. And as Daniel stepped off the stage, he smiled to himself because he knew his story was still being written. But the boy who never gave up had finally found his place in the world. And that, my friend, is the story of Daniel, a boy who was told he wouldn't go far, a boy who faced rejection, loss, and hardship, a boy who stumbled, who fell, but always stood again. He became the living proof that persistence is stronger than talent, stronger than luck, stronger than fear. He became the boy who never gave up, and in truth, he became the man who showed us all what it means to keep going, no matter what.